as we deepen into our service and share our opening words for this morning. The opening words are titled, "We Are One," and they were written by Hope Johnson, a minister in the UU. We are one, a diverse group of proudly kindred spirits, here not by coincidence, but because we choose to journey together. We are active and proactive. We care deeply. We live our love as best we can. We are one, working, eating, laughing, playing, singing, storytelling, sharing, and rejoicing, getting to know each other, taking risks, opening up, questioning, seeking, searching, trying to understand, struggling, making mistakes, paying attention, asking questions, listening, living our answers, learning to love our neighbors, learning to love ourselves, apologizing and forgiving with humility, and being forgiven, creating the beloved community together. We are one. Our first reading for this morning is by Lynn Harrison. It's entitled Committed to Respond. Committed to respond to the call of a wounded world. We join together this day with loving hearts, hands, and minds, embracing the interconnected web of water, air, and earth. We light a fire of sustaining hope, ever bright with love and justice. May we bring forth this day new wisdom, strength, and courage to create a new world, not of wealth, but of well-being, a world of new peace and abundance for all. As we give thanks for this earth, our shared and singular home, may we dedicate ourselves to its ongoing care, rising to the calls deep within us and all around us. May we respond today and always with courage and with love. Our second reading this morning is by Alicia Ford, and it's titled When We Pause to Remember. Alicia Ford is a professional development director at the Unitarian Universalist Association. Alicia identifies as an African descent, queer, cisgender female with deep roots in Tobago. When we pause to remember who we are, companions on this grand experiment called life, when we take a moment to shed the ways we have been carefully taught, to lead from fear, to punish the poor, to persecute those who don't look like we do, to deny rights to those who love, to believe that we are separate, that some people are superior to others. When we take a moment to shed all of that and hear our stories, hear and see each other into existence, into community, when we take a moment to embrace, to practice a different way of being, when we answer the call of love, then we are living into the promise of building the world we dream about. It is beautiful to dream, to cast a vision, to stretch our minds into the future and imagine what may be if we were to build a new way of being. Not someday, but beginning again today. Beginning again every day that we have breath. Taking courage with these hands and hearts to make real the dream of a more equitable world, to journey together, seeking to be transformed, even as we transform. Becoming explorers and learners in this world around us, humbled by what we do not yet know, fulfilling the promise of healing a fragmented world, laboring not just in hope, but also in love. In this spirit, we commit. In this spirit, we gather. Our speaker this morning is Claire Laustuder. She is the local foods coordinator for Bismarck, working collaboratively with the Bismarck Public Schools, the City of Bismarck, and Bismarck Parks and Recreation District. Claire has a strong and varied background in food issues. She and her husband Derek served 2 years in the Peace Corps in Ethiopia, working on conservation and natural resource management issues. Claire worked in 4-H programs in Rugby, North Dakota, through the NDSU Extension Service, as well as an organizer for the Dakota Resource Council in Bismarck. She also raises ducks on a small farm east of Bismarck with her husband and daughter. I'm very pleased to welcome our friend, Claire Studer.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for the introduction. So obviously we introduced all of our speakers, but I want to emphasize that like those things Don said, that is my lens on this issue. I'm not an expert in climate justice or food equity, but I do know a little bit about some things. So just keep that in mind and give me some grace as I talk about this today, please. And then also I have these tabs on my computer, so I'm not gonna be able to see you guys while I read my script. So let me know if there's something I need to stop for. But also some of these things I'm gonna talk about, Marcy has the links for, because there's my experience and then there's some research that I did and things I'm sharing from other organizations. So please let us know if there's any questions, and I can certainly answer them at the end if we have time. So climate and food, what's the connection? If you've ever tried the garden here in North Dakota, you know that our climate is the most significant factor in your success. We obsess over the first and last frost dates, as well as finding the best produce varieties for our growing zone. With climate change, we see these growing zones start to change. We have seen devastating drought. Driving through the Midwest this summer, you probably noticed the topsoil blowing away like it was insignificant road dust. In fact, it's very significant. Researchers know that industrial agriculture is a contributing factor in climate change. Today, agriculture and forestry activities generate 24% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, and that comes from Project Drawdown. I also want to share these paragraphs from the UUA summarizing this UN Sundays theme. It is important to educate communities about the ways in which our food is grown and the impact those farming practices have on our planet. We must ensure that all people have access to delicious, nutritious, affordable, and culturally appropriate foods. On a larger scale, food systems must be informed by traditional farming techniques that honor the sacredness of the land itself and that center the independent web of all existence. Food systems need a revolution towards food sovereignty to put control of the land and what and how food is grown on that land back in the hands of people and communities with connection to the land and deep knowledge about how to grow food rather than the hands of corporations. Appreciation for biodiversity and caring for the whole food cycle, not just singular crops, is critical in the move toward equity and sustainability. And I want to share this video. I think Marcy has it queued up from Now This Earth. It's really interesting about regenerative agriculture.
We need to reimagine what our economy looks like so that we can all be fed without trashing the planet. The idea of regenerative farming is pretty simple. It's the concept that human beings don't inherently need to trash the planet to eat. It's a bit more labor intensive, but there's no shortage of people who need work. So we do not use pesticides or any type of artificial chemical input. Instead, we are imitating the way the forest works. We grow a lot of crops in high tunnels. These are plastic hoop houses that warm it up a little bit for our cold mountain climate. Inside a hoop house, you're gonna get a lot of pests built up over the season. And also the soil gets a little tired at the end of the season. So I'm gonna put a whole bunch of chickens in there over the winter, and the chickens are gonna scratch up. They're gonna eat all the pest insects. They will eat any weed seeds that we didn't catch, and they'll poop everywhere, and that will be the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium fertilizer that we need for next season. No chemical inputs, and the side benefit is we're gonna eat eggs all winter. Soil in some ways will naturally lose its nutrients over time through erosion. It's a natural process. So our job as farmers is to make sure we're adding what we took plus a little bit more every year in the form of compost and different kind of rock dust, depending what our soil needs. The way the soil gets worse is if we accelerate erosion by plowing and tilling often, and also if we're planting crops and not putting back what we took. So you plant corn, you harvest that whole plant, which is a lot of biomass, eat all the corn, but you didn't put any compost back or put any pigs on there to graze. Now you're essentially mining the nutrients out of the soil over time. Topsoil is the thin layer of the Earth's crust upon which all life depends. It's the only thing that will grow food for us. It's the only thing that will grow trees that make oxygen. It is such a thin, fragile layer that it can be very easily damaged. So we need to preserve our soil. I mean, the good news is we can build it. You know, we can build it through composting and mulching and put it back. But the natural cycle, you know, it takes hundreds of years just to build 1 inch of precious soil.
Thank you, Marcy, for sharing that video. I really appreciate how she said the farm that she's part of, Soul Fire Farm, they imitate the forest. Because in healthy forests, we don't see just neat rows of one species, right? There's a lot going on. There's a lot of diversity. And it's interesting to me how modern agriculture is relearning that we need to work with nature the way many indigenous cultures still do, instead of fighting it and trying to dominate it. And now during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of flaws in our global food industry were brought to light. There should be more than enough food in the world, but people are still going hungry. Last year, we saw empty shelves in stores across the US. And so in some areas, we saw this rush to eat local, but farmers and ranchers weren't necessarily ready for a surplus of panic buyers. It takes months of planning and work, for instance, to have locally raised meat available for direct sale. I know a local rancher in Mercer County who typically has her pigs sold before the animals are even on her farm. So in 2020, people who had never purchased from her before were frustrated she didn't all of a sudden have meat for them mid-season. And today, trucking companies can't get enough workers, so difficult adjustments are being made. Unfortunately, one of the casualties of these adjustments is school lunch programs. School nutrition programs are being dropped from delivery routes and left scrambling to purchase elsewhere the food needed to feed students. And this is hitting rural schools the hardest. So there are definitely many complicated global challenges that affect everyone, and especially, like many things, especially marginalized populations. So I think policymakers at all levels should be working towards real systems change, so disruptions like this aren't so devastating, and so that all voices are heard. In my opinion, for most people, it makes the most sense to try to make an impact in the community where you live. So let's talk about our community of Bismarck, Mandan, as well as North Dakota statewide. So one program that I work with is the Farm to School program at Bismarck Public Schools, and this was started before I came on board, and they are investing in Farm to School because they believe it makes a difference. It's not just this feel-good story story to put in the media. Buying locally means the food is fresher, it tastes better, and more money stays in our local economy. Students are then able to make a real connection to their food, connect to it in a meaningful way. Bismarck Public Schools buys produce from small local farms and distributes it to their 22 schools. They also purchase other North Dakota products, including milk, honey, and baked goods. The North Dakota Department of Agriculture has created some helpful resources for producers to start selling to farm-to-school programs across the state. So I think it's great to see that there's the support from the state government as well. We all need to eat, and we all have different preferences, cultural backgrounds, and financial means. Not all actions are doable for everyone, but maybe we can each make 1 or 2 small changes to our consumption. I'm afraid sometimes environmentalists come off as judgmental in their desire to share advice on lowering our carbon footprint, and that's certainly not where I want to come from. Shaming people isn't a good way to spark change. But I do want to share some things that are going on in the Bismarck community in North Dakota as a whole. There's probably a lot more. As I said, I'm not an extensive expert on this, but this is some stuff that I do know about. So one thing we can all do is support local farmers and businesses. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And again, I can share my whole outline with anybody that's interested. Some people, you may have heard of a CSA, it's Community Supported Agriculture. When you join a CSA, you make an investment in a local farm at the beginning of the season so that the farmer is able to then purchase the things that they need, seeds, boxes, whatever kind of materials they need, maybe pay for employees. And you get to try some fun new things. Whenever I've done a CSA, you might have to Google the particular vegetable because you've never seen it before or worked with it before. Another thing to do would be shop farmers markets and food co-ops. And that way you get to know the producers, meet them face to face, maybe see their children. And kind of, it's fun to watch the kids grow up after you go to the farmers market every year. And your money helps build your community. Producers have a chance to grow their business. I work with the Bismarck farmers market, and some of the farmers have been able to learn more what their customers need and start to diversify and expand their business and be successful, because it's very tough to start a farming business or to keep one going. Another thing to do would choose wisely. So Michaela put in the comments that livestock are a big contributing factor to climate change, and that's absolutely correct. But there's a big difference between a CAFO, a concentrated animal feeding operation, and like a regenerative agriculture operation where the animals aren't in this confinement, they're being moved around. The person raising them cares about the land, cares about the animals themselves, puts their welfare into account. So, because we're not going to make everybody vegan, it's just not practical. But and some of these like vegan options also are detrimental to land if we're growing a monoculture of soy, for instance. So if you do eat meat, purchase it locally from a small rancher in North Dakota. There's plenty of choices for people who have more sustainable operations. I live next to Brown's Ranch. You might have heard of Nourished by Nature. And so some of it's a little more expensive because there is more labor put into it. You know, she mentioned in that video that regenerative agriculture tends to be more labor intensive. And so it's not going to be cheap, but it is much higher quality. And then another thing, locally, there's a lot of restaurants that are locally owned restaurants. So you're supporting a small business, and also some of these places are using local ingredients, eggs, veggies, etc. Something that I definitely am ignorant on, but I know that there's some work being done towards it, is food sovereignty. For instance, United Tribes Technical College has a sustainable agriculture program, and that's a link maybe we could drop in the chat, because I just think that's such a great program where students are being encouraged to learn about food sovereignty, work on crop production operations in outdoor and indoor greenhouse environments. They're looking at the economic, ecological, and social aspects of sustainability in agriculture, and practicing community engagement through presentations, food preparation, and food distribution. And I know that they work closely with the culinary arts program at the college as well. In the North Dakota Co-op magazine, I recently saw this article about the Spirit Lake food distribution program, where they're building an indoor garden. So a lot of these food distribution programs and reservations, sometimes it's just commodity foods. It's nothing special. It's nothing particularly healthy. But they're building an indoor gardening center so that 1,000 tribal members, more than 1,000 tribal members, will have access to fresh, locally sourced food in addition to providing skilled jobs. Another way to work towards food sovereignty or food security, which are different, but we can grow our own food, right? It's not for everybody. Not everybody enjoys it. But whether you live in an apartment or you have 40 acres, you can grow your own food in a small pot, in a huge garden. You know, it's a very satisfying, sometimes heartbreaking adventure, but nothing better than a fresh tomato, in my opinion. And then I want to share, there's a lot of groups working on food sustainability and advocacy. There's a North Dakota Local Foods Development Alliance, and they are an organization that started just a few years ago, but they are taking on that, are attempting to take on that issue of the food distribution for schools and seeing like, how can we make a difference? Because in the video, you know, she mentioned having certain guidelines that schools have to follow. So it's not like they can just go to the grocery store and pick up food. For one, it's a huge amount of kids that they have to serve, even in the small districts. It's a lot of work happening very quickly to get all those meals out every day. But they are trying to figure out how can we fix this gap, because pretty soon these schools are going to be left without their distribution channels that they rely on. Another advocacy group is FARMS, that's FARRMS, and they do a lot to help beginning farmers and ranchers. Dakota Resource Council, of course, they know that they just joined the Local Foods Development Alliance, and they've long been advocates for family farms. Karen Ahrens runs the Creating a Hunger-Free North Dakota Coalition, so they're another player in some of these things. And then North Dakota Farmers Union, I know they teamed up with DRC on the Family Farms Initiative, and they continue to do their best. They're a little more leaning towards the commodity growers, but we do need to support commodity growers who are caring about the land, trying to do things right, because there's a lot of food we need to produce, right? And it's not necessarily family farms aren't necessarily going to solve that issue on their own. Of course, education, we need to be talking about this with everybody, not just students, but with farm to school, farm tours and presentations at the school are, I think, are really important, because despite living in a rural state with an agricultural economy, many students in Bismarck, for instance, have never been to a farm. They haven't seen a chicken in real life. They're not aware of how food makes it to their plates. I did a little food activity this summer with the BLAST program through Parks and Rec, and we gave the kids some fresh veggies, and we said, go ahead and snack on them while we're talking, and because there was some carrots in there, but the kids were picking up onions and taking bites out of them because they didn't know what a raw onion looked like. So they thought, oh, this is a crunchy food, but you can see how that might have gone. So I just think food education obviously is really important at all levels. And the last thing I wanted to touch on would be to reduce waste. Another program I got involved in briefly this year is Glean ND. It was started in Fargo, where volunteers can sign up and farms can sign up, and then they kind of team up to reduce food waste by, let's say for whatever reason, the farmer wasn't able to get to all of their products, their veggies or whatever they're growing that year. So volunteers can come in and glean or harvest the produce and then find a home for it. So often that's going to be food distribution centers, food pantries. We did Glean ND in Bismarck in September, and we were able to do apples and distribute those to the senior center and to some of the local schools. Composting, she talked about composting, that video with Soul Fire Farm. That's another thing that somebody can do on their just an individual scale, or we can see that on a large scale where waste is being incorporated back into the growing operation. And then if you shop at the co-op or farmers markets, you might have heard of Ugly Food. There's a program called Ugly Food of the North. I think, again, started in Fargo, but where, we're trying to teach people that your carrots don't have to be perfectly uniform. Your apples don't have to be perfectly round and shiny, learning that ugly food is still going to taste good. So again, trying to just reduce waste by having more of it not get thrown out.
All right. Thank you very much, Claire. And just it is really important. Food is something that is so integral to human beings, community together. It always has, and it can be something that really brings us together. And so appreciate your talk this morning. We are never complete. We are never finished. We are always yet to be. May we always allow others to be and help and enable each other to grow toward all that we are capable of becoming.
Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Mother, I feel you under my feet. Mother,